might come close to being a 303, Frank.
Might well be. I would expect certainly that during these early and confusing moments of this thing, we're likely to get conflicting reports. It's of no consequence in the final analysis. The president is dead, has been shot. I'm sure that all of us from time to time have wondered if it is really necessary to go to the great lengths that the Secret Service does go to in trying to protect the life of the president of the United States. Each infinite detail is checked out. I would assume, but I think it's a safe assumption, that the driver of the automobile, who was a Secret Service man, knew instantly where the nearest hospital in Dallas was located. And the reports we have received from there say that he sped away immediately and went directly to the hospital in an effort to spare the president first from further gunfire, and secondly, of course, to get him to the hospital as quickly as possible. But despite the inconvenience and the annoyance that is connected with the Secret Service effort to protect the life of the president of the United States, it still comes as a tremendous shock to us to realize that a thing like this can happen in our country, and with the precautions that are made. One of those who was a witness to the assassination today and was a member of the presidential party was Texas Senator Ralph Yarbrough, and he went to the hospital when the president was taken there, and was the first to give newsmen anxiously awaiting in corridors outside some indication of what the president's condition might be. This is a picture, I think, if we can get it here on our frame, of the Texas senator at the hospital as he came out and tried to talk with the newsmen. Everyone was shocked and broken up, and he quite obviously is under some stress and strain, appears to be in tears. Texas Senator Ralph Yarbrough.
Frank, in speaking of precautions taken in presidential motorcades of security, the attempts to protect them from any possible attack, I have ridden in those motorcades, and you have too, and I'm sure you realize that total protection is just completely impossible.
As they realize this, if one stops and thinks, here you have a distance of maybe 15 or 20 miles, and the person that you're trying to protect is in an open automobile. Quite frequently he is standing and waving. The distance from his arrival point to his destination, as I say, could be 15 miles. You can have hundreds, literally hundreds of thousands, and on occasion millions of people lining these streets. There are hundreds and hundreds of buildings on either side where an assassin could attempt to conceal himself. So in a very real sense, it is an impossible thing to give complete and total protection to the President of the United States. Wasn't even attempted, as a matter of fact, prior to the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. We had no Secret Service.
We have further reaction, Frank, from overseas on the loss of President Kennedy. West Germany's Chancellor Ludwig Erhard said the news fills the German people with deep grief. Again from Rome, Cardinal McIntyre of Los Angeles, Cardinal Ritter of St. Louis called together the student priests of Rome's North American College to recite prayers for the late president. Cardinal McIntyre said Cardinal Ritter and myself were having dinner when we heard the news, astounding news of President Kennedy's death. And Cardinal McIntyre said, we are shocked, grief-stricken, and our hearts are pained. The Italian Premier-designate Aldo Moro said, speaking of President Kennedy, his stature as a politician in this great country and on the international scene was growing in the years of courageous policy of renewal. French Prime Minister Pompidou said, it is atrocious, it is frightful, I am overwhelmed. As is the city where President Kennedy fulfilled his duties, the city of Washington, D.C. So for further developments there, we switch now to David Brinkley in Washington.
The flag has been lowered at the White House. The acting White House Press Secretary, Malcolm Kilduff, he is acting in the absence of Pierre Salinger, who is in a jet plane out over the Pacific. He, along with 4 members of the President's cabinet, was on his way to Japan for a meeting. When the news reached them about a half hour ago, the plane turned around and headed back toward Hawaii and then back toward Washington. Kilduff said the President's body would be flown to Washington this afternoon. Senator Kennedy, Senator Edward Kennedy, the President's brother, and Mrs. Sargent Shriver, his sister, that's Eunice Kennedy, arrived at the White House a few minutes ago. From there, they took a helicopter to Andrews Air Force Base, which is a few miles outside of town. From there, they will take a jet plane to fly to Dallas to join Mrs. Kennedy. The Attorney General, Robert Kennedy, was at home in Virginia having lunch when the news came. He lives a mile or so outside the city limits. He came back into town and is leaving, or has left, for the airport also to fly to Texas. The government has been closed down. Congress has adjourned. The four members of the cabinet, as I say, who were over the Pacific have turned back. Some of the comments from members of the Senate betray the same shock and horror expressed by everyone else on hearing the news. For example, Mike Mansfield, the Democratic leader of the Senate, when the news came to him, said he was a man who contributed so much and deserved so much more in return. Senator Bible of Nevada said it's one of the great tragedies of our lifetime, and the world has lost a great champion in the United States, a courageous president. And Senator Byrd of Virginia said he was deeply shocked. It's a disaster, and he could not find words to express his distress. There are similar sentiments expressed by everyone who has said anything at all. The Secret Service, which normally is stationed, the Secret Service, which is charged with protecting the president, physically protecting him, is a plainclothes civilian arm of the United States Treasury, which is just next door to the White House, to the left of the picture you see. They are the husky, muscular young men you see in the news pictures. When the president's motorcade is moving at slow speed in a street or a parade, they usually walk along or run along beside it. They are aware that it is impossible. You see a crowd is gathering across the street. That's Lafayette Park, facing the front entrance to the White House. A crowd is gathered over there for no particular reason, because there is nothing anybody can do. But crowds usually do gather there in moments of crisis. That is, of course, the White House flag at half-staff, lowered as soon as the news came. The Secret Service tries to guard him as best it can, very often by keeping their own bodies in line of any weapon that may be aimed at the president. But obviously, they can't cover every window or every tree or every manhole, and they rely primarily on the decency and the good sense of the American people. That, again, is NBC's live television camera on the White House lawn, looking through the iron picket fence across Pennsylvania Avenue to Lafayette Park, named for the Marquis de Lafayette, whose statue is there, and people are beginning to gather there. These are the grounds of the White House, the West Executive Wing, where the president's office is, and where a few minutes ago George Reedy, who is a close associate of Lyndon Johnson, arrived. Didn't say anything, but we assume he came to help make arrangements for the changeover of administration. We don't know specifically yet that Lyndon Johnson has been sworn in, has officially taken the oath, but whether or not he has, he soon will, and whether or not he has, he's president anyway, because that's how the Constitution spells it out. He will, of course, serve out the remainder of Mr. Kennedy's term until January of that. We don't know. That is about all the detail we have here at the moment, Frank. So we'll switch back to New York for any further details you may have from Dallas or elsewhere.
I'd say only this, David, that we are still in touch with Dallas, and as we are with you there in Washington, and very shortly, of course, the emphasis of one part of the story will shift from Dallas back to Washington. It is being anticipated that the president's body is being flown back to the nation's capital, perhaps even now. And that is where we expect President Johnson to officially be sworn in. We are anxious, of course, for further information on the quest for the assassin. We do not know whether the actual assassin has been placed under arrest yet or not. We've had stories that one, perhaps two persons have been placed under arrest in Texas, and we have had stories within the past half hour that a Secret Service man as well as a Dallas policeman were killed in a shooting incident sometime after the president had been assassinated. The assumption here would be that the two shootings are connected, but it's not necessarily true. So in very short order, the story will shift to Washington for the formalities there. We'll remain in Dallas for the search for the assassins there, and we will keep our team standing by in both areas to bring you the developments as soon as we have them. That's the point I was trying to make.
Yes, right. There is this, too, detail on Mrs. Kennedy following the assassination of her husband, the president. Mrs. Kennedy and the president's body were escorted from the emergency entrance of Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas by 2 motorcycle officers. It is said that Mrs. Kennedy walked out the back door of the emergency entrance as the president's body was being taken out. She walked slowly. She looked around her in what is described as a dazed manner and appeared to be in a state of shock. Those who saw her enter the hospital an hour and a half earlier said she had not been hysterical, but in spite of the tremendous experience she had undergone and was undergoing, she had managed to control herself and keep her head. There is this ironic note. The main body of the reporters who daily cover the president apparently did not know that he had lost his life until they got to the destination which the motorcade was headed for, the Trade Mart where the president had been scheduled to make a speech this afternoon. As Robert McNeil has pointed out, he was in the first press bus riding behind the president, and that was 3 cars behind the president's car. The main body of the White House reporters was at the rear of the motorcade. They were riding in 2 buses, and there were many of them who did not know of the shooting until they got to the downtown Trade Mart in Dallas, and there they found out their first hard news of what had happened, although they did have some idea of what was going on when they saw the motorcade start to fall apart and Dallas police and Secret Service men start to take off in all directions. We are told now that President Kennedy's body will arrive at Andrews Air Force Base at 5:30 this afternoon, Washington time.
It's about a little less than 2 hours from now, Bill.
Just about 2 hours, yes. Reaction from overseas. The first point we are able to call in right now, our correspondent in Rome, Irving R. Levine.
Shock and grief are the reactions in Italy, where President Kennedy was enormously popular. Italian President Segni immediately sent an aide to the American embassy to express his sympathy. President Segni called President Kennedy's death a great loss to humanity. Pope Paul is preparing a radiogram, which is expected to be ready within an hour. Italian radio and television made the announcement of the president's death and then went off the air except for solemn music. Cardinal Spellman and other American bishops in Rome for the Ecumenical Council expressed shock. Cardinal Spellman said that he is saying rosary for President Kennedy now. Irving R. Levine, NBC News, Rome.
There's the first overseas point we have called in to bring you a reaction to the assassination of President Kennedy, which took place in Dallas, Texas this afternoon. Frank McGee is in touch with Robert McNeil.
Let me interrupt
White House
you,
correspondent
what you're
who was
telling
traveling
me.
with the president at the time the assassination took place. Here's Frank's conversation with McNeil.
I just wanted to interrupt you to tell you that you are going on the air. You are, in fact, on the air now, so why don't you make the report direct, Bob?
None of us can find words to express the deepest feelings of our hearts. We realize that this is a time of mourning, yet we would each come relying upon the faith that we possess. We would each come with perhaps the most earnest prayer that we ever offered in behalf of our president, our governor, the members of their families. So we pray that even in this gathering, that we may reveal that calmness that shall be pleasing to thee, and that we shall